The latest tech.
People love iPhone, and it's an important part of our daily lives.
Interviews.
You see far too many products that come on the market that you look at that you say, was a blind person ever even consulted for something like this?
Accessibility.
The most interesting thing over the last couple of years is the emphasis on gaming and accessibility.
This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome to the program. I am Stephen Scott.
And I am Marc. Stephen, remember before the new year we did a show fielding audience questions? We called us Ask Us Anything.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Well, one of those questions got us thinking, and that question came from Damashe Thomas. And here it is.
I'm sending in this video question for the AMA. Two reasons. One, I really kind of want to know the answer to this question. You guys may have covered it before, but I have missed it, so I'm interested to know. And two, hopefully I'll also get in time to get one of those special water bottles. Mark, you can send me Stevens because he doesn't really need it. But my question for you all really is just get into the gear used to produce Double Tap TV and Double Tap On Air, the weekly or Monday through Saturday podcast. The microphones that you guys use, cameras use when you're doing video, audio interfaces, headphones, lights. The lights are so important. Cameras, again, something very difficult for me to locate, a decent camera. So just curious to know what sort of equipment and software goes into producing the content that you all are creating. Especially interested to know as well, if you're traveling and you have to still produce a show, what would you take with you, or what's in that travel bag? What sort of microphone, what sort of, on-the-go camera do you take? So appreciate you guys, appreciate what you do each week, and appreciate answering this question for me.
Well, thank you, Damashe. What a great idea. Stephen, today we're going to be taking his advice.
Yeah, we're going to be diving into way more detail, because I think we did touch on it last time, but we're going to get into much more detail this time and talk about really how we produce not only this show, Double Tap TV, but the Double Tap Daily podcast as well.
Stephen, this is really kind of an ever-evolving topic because as technology changes, and to be honest and fair, we get a little itchy on the trigger finger when it comes to camera and audio technology. Nothing really sticks, right? You tend to want to upgrade a camera, maybe upgrade a lens, maybe there's a new microphone to try out there. We're constantly tweaking things, which is why this type of episode is always fun to do, because we are changing things from year to year. And we did do one of these, I think. Did we do it last season? Maybe a couple seasons back.
Yeah.
We might have changed positioning or maybe swapped out equipment. And I know you, Stephen, you're kind of all over this.
Yes, and all over the place with technology usually as well. And our audience knows this as well. If they don't, they're about to find out that I tend to redo everything in this studio of mine every couple of months.
Yeah, and that goes from everything from buying a new desk to fit in the little nook in your office, maybe adding a little tripod. I mean, there's so many things, and quite honestly, you saying that is just a little bit of an understatement because this is constantly evolving. So it's a great opportunity for us to talk about what's new in our studios and how it all comes together.
Okay, so I think we should probably start at the beginning of all this and perhaps tell the story of how this came together. Because 5 years ago, when we decided to do this show, I knew that I just couldn't pick up equipment and go. So you flew all the way here to Glasgow in Scotland after ordering a whole bunch of equipment, sending it over and getting it all set up for me, along with yourself. It was incredible.
Yeah, and that room, to be perfectly honest and fair, was probably fairly different than it looks like today. Most of the gear is actually the same. Like the actual camera is probably the same. Maybe the lens changed and stuff over time. But we also learn a lot over time. And as we want to improve things, we obviously change them up. So why don't I start with the basics and the most important details, which I think, first of all is, we're not in the same location, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we film a show like this when we're not in the same location? We have to connect and put it all together in some way, shape, or form. Well, believe it or not, that's pretty easy, and that's all thanks to modern technology. Funny how that works and comes around, right?
Yeah.
So you and I connect to each other over Zoom, sometimes it's even FaceTime, and we record just as if we're on a phone call, having a conversation with each other. And the reason we do that is because services like Zoom and FaceTime really have that low latency. And when I use the word latency, it's really about a delay. The delay between when I finish speaking and you finish hearing me. Sometimes that can be longer depending on internet congestion. Sometimes that's really short. But we know that Zoom and FaceTime have really done a really good job at doing that. Now, sometimes we do use a web-based service that is called Riverside.fm, which is actually designed for remote interviews and podcasters. It's completely online. It works really very much like Zoom, but doesn't require that piece of software on your computer. And it works from any computer. As long as you're using a Chrome browser, you can load it up. You can send a link to somebody who's remote, whether they're a guest or whether it's you and I. And it lets you connect in both high quality audio and video and record it almost exactly like a Zoom call. But there is a catch. The catch is services like Zoom just send what's on the internet, whereas services like Riverside actually record things locally. So it's always recording a version, high quality, that comes right out of my camera, my microphone on my side, a high quality version on your end, and over the time of the conversation, it's uploading that to the cloud. So when I go to download that file after we're done, it's pristine. It's really what's at the source. So even if there are hiccups or anything that goes on while we're actually conversing, in the video conversation, we can ignore that unless it gets really bad, because we know that the service we're using is going to make up for that.
Now, Mark, we do have both actually Sony digital SLR cameras in front of us right here. Mine is actually mounted to my ceiling to stay out of the way.
And mine's actually on a tripod in front of me that doesn't move at all. So that's a permanent setup for me. Now, in front of mine, I've got a teleprompter that actually sits in front of the camera. It's got a glass that's at a 45-degree angle that reflects what's beneath it. In my case, it's an iPad that's projecting upwards on that glass but doesn't get in the actual shot. Now, I don't normally script an entire show, but it's a good place to have notes and be able to see things that you might forget, like, I don't know, a guest's name or the pronunciation or how to spell things sometimes. You have websites that you need to go on. Having a prompter in front of you is a great way to make sure you don't lose your place. I was talking about the fact that we don't script the show, and it's true. There's sometimes where we write some questions down if we want to make sure that we get to a certain point. But what we do is we actually record this, what we call live to tape. And what live to tape means is that we're doing this as a conversation. I love the fact that it goes back to our old, radio day mindset.
Absolutely. And speaking of radio, there's more to this setup as well. Of course, it's not just video, it's audio. And above my head, which you would not see on screen, is my shotgun microphone, which is from Sennheiser, right?
Yeah, yours is if I believe it's an MKE 600 from Sennheiser, to get specific. I've got a similar setup here. I've got a shotgun mic right out of shot here. That's an MKH 416 shotgun microphone. Shotgun microphones are actually pretty great because not only do they capture the audio that's right in front of it, so it helps reject the noise that's around it.
And the thing here is about the microphones, they're actually hardwired directly into our cameras. And the purpose for that is so that the audio and the video we record is always in sync.
Yeah, and if you're used to doing, video conversations or video chats online with Zoom or whatever, sometimes you can see the lips moving, but the sound isn't really matching it. So having the microphone plugged directly into the camera means it's recording everything at the same time, which is pretty cool. The last thing I wanted to mention, of course, was lenses. People, when you're familiar with cameras, there are different types of lenses. There's different focal points and different, focus lengths. I use a 24 millimeter fixed focal length lens in front of me. So do you. That means that you can't zoom it in or out any way, shape, or form, meaning we are fixed in our position. And the benefit of that is that these fixed focal length lenses allow in a lot of light, which means we don't have to boost up ISO or boost up any camera settings to compensate for it, which means get a nice, clear image. And the last thing, Stephen, we also record this in 4K on both our ends. So we'll get to editing and stuff later, but I think we want to take a little bit of a break and maybe get into some of the podcast stuff too.
Yeah, there's so much to unveil, really, and I think a lot of people are clearly interested in this. I think it's a great opportunity for people to geek out with us and learn about how we do what we do here.
So let's do that. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about podcasts. This is Double Tap TV.
You're watching Double Tap TV. Get involved. Follow us at Double Tap On Air or email us feedback@doubletaponair.com. Double Tap TV will be right back. You're watching watching Double Tap TV.
Back on Double Tap TV, Stephen, we talked about our TV setups and, of course, the different equipment that we use on the TV side of things. And don't worry, we'll get to editing soon because I do want to touch on that as well. I do, however, know that a lot of people listen to the Double Tap Daily podcast. And I know that they also want to know how on earth you produce that, because similarly to this TV show, you know, Sean Priest is in a different location in his shed in Manchester. You're in Glasgow. Audio, though, it's a little easier than video, right?
It is, and it's interesting because I have tried so many different things over the years to try and ultimately get the best audio quality we can get on the radio show. And, you know, a lot of people have complimented our show and said, it sounds like the kind of show where you're sitting in the same room. And that is a lot to do with the kind of work we've done to try and achieve that. Now, the simplest way to do this, and this is what we did in day one, was for Sean and I to record locally. We would both use Audacity, our editing software, which is I haven't used Audacity in my entire life. I started out with what was Cool Edit Pro, you'll remember that, Mark, and then of course that moved on to become Adobe Audition, and then as accessibility became an issue with those particular applications, I moved over to Audacity. And the great thing about Audacity is it's a free open source audio editor for Mac and PC, and you can download it, you can use it completely free of charge, and it's fairly accessible. On the PC side, it is more accessible. It used to be more accessible on the Mac. Hopefully that will change. So in terms of editing, that's the easy way to do it, but we could record that way as well. So I could literally have a microphone plugged into a mixing console, as I did at the beginning, which was, I think, an Allen and Heath mixer at the time, and then that would record straight into Audacity. And then Sean and I would get on a FaceTime call, and we would hear each other clearly, and like Mark says, without that latency, without that delay, so we can have a proper conversation and record a high quality conversation. But of course, that's never good enough for me. I like to play with toys, and, you know, that meant I started buying things. And one product that came out, which I really have fallen in love with, is the Rodecaster 2 Pro, which is a mixing console with a range of different inputs in it. It's got physical sliders, so you can control your microphone, you can control your inputs. You can also connect two computers to this, or one computer with a range of different outputs to it. And there's reasons for that and why that's really important. But it also has on it 8 sound pads. So you can put your jingles on there. You can fire off your little jingles, and you'll know when you hear me play the music on the show that introduces the program, or when we go to break. That is me pressing that button and playing that in. Now, why do I use the Rodecaster Pro over, say, any other mixer? I mean, analog surely is easier, right? Certainly more accessible, physical buttons and knobs to play with. This Rodecaster Pro 2 is not particularly accessible. The touchscreen system that operates it is not the most accessible. That can be a challenge. But the important thing here is use of the device and how it can make my life easier. Once it's set up, it really can make my life easier. So here's how I have it laid out. I have my Mac connected to it. Now, when you connect to the first USB port on the Rodecaster Pro 2, you actually get 2 outputs. So you get a chat output and a system output. And what that means is that all my conversational stuff, stuff I'm doing, say with Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any of those kind of applications, are used on that individual channel. And then on the other channel, I've got all my system sounds. And for me, that's important because I use VoiceOver. So I can keep my VoiceOver separate from my chat, so it's not mixed together. That's important when you're recording. Now then I have a second USB channel, which I connect to my PC, and that's what I use for all my editing. Like I say, Audacity for me is easier on the PC. So I have a PC setup and a Mac. Now what we've used, and we've tried many different applications over the years, we've used Zoom to record, which we find fantastic. And I will mention something on Zoom which is really important for people to know about. This is a feature called Original Sound. It's just changed it recently. I think it's now called Original Sound for musicians. It's a setting when you go into your preferences on Zoom, and you have different settings and options in there. Under audio, you can actually choose to have this setting available. When you click that, that's giving the highest quality from your microphone down the line. Now, the reason they have that as an option on particularly a platform like Zoom is because not everyone might be in a position to have the best internet connection. So you may have a situation where, if you do use that, you're using more bandwidth, which means you're taking up, more of the space in the bandwidth, and it actually affects the quality of the call. You end up with more dropouts. So that's why it's not on by default. But for someone who's doing a podcast, who's maybe got their computer wired into their internet router, this could be really useful. So you go into your audio settings, you go to the original sound option, you turn that on, and then it becomes available to you as an option in your Zoom meeting. Also, another feature of Zoom, which is well worth knowing about, is under the recording option in preferences, you can also choose to record individual tracks separately. So if, for example, I cough over something Sean says, I can edit that cough out later because they're on 2 separate tracks when I load it all into Audacity. So that's where Zoom is really good, and we found that fantastic. But we moved on to a fantastic platform called CleanFeed, and that's what we use today. We've been using it now for about 2-3 months on the show, and we find it really useful because what CleanFeed does is it allows you to connect all your guests in an easy way. They can connect with a simple link. I send an email link out to them. They can then click on that, and any browser will open up and drop them right into the CleanFeed session. All they have to do is allow their microphone to accept, to be used on that call. Even on a smartphone, you can do that. So suddenly you're in a position where you're able to get guests on easily. And that, especially if you have contributors who are blind or disabled, making it easy is the key. So, that's what we use. And I have my mixer connected. But I will say this, Mark, and I'll just wrap on this. I think the most interesting thing here is that of all the technology I've tried, and, we've tried lots of different things with lots of really complicated setups. Actually, I bought a Shure MV7 microphone, which is a USB microphone. It also has an XLR connection if you want to connect it to one of those analog desks. But if you don't, and you don't have all that, you don't need it. You can get a Shure MV7 microphone. I use this when I'm out and about. I plug it in via USB into my MacBook. It becomes my default microphone. It has a headphone socket in the back. And the benefit there is I get high quality input. I can hear my contributors on Zoom or CleanFeed or wherever I am. And equally, I can hear my voiceover, and that is not transmitted into the mix that is being sent and recorded. So a very simple solution which, can bypass all the fancy hardware. The problem for me though, Mark, is I like my toys. So even though there's a really simple solution, I prefer the toy option.
Yeah, well, as I said off the top, this is going to constantly evolve, and thankfully technology, which was what drives this show, will also drive future episodes just like this, talking about what we use next. Let's take a quick break and come back and talk a little bit about video editing before we wrap things up here on Double Tap TV.
Can't get enough Double Tap TV? Subscribe to the podcast and get your fill of Double Tap every day. Visit doubletaponair.com and follow us now. Double Tap TV will be right back. You're watching Double Tap TV.
Steven, so we've talked about our video setups and, of course, recording, and we've covered off how you record and produce the podcast. I guess the next logical step is to go into putting it all together for TV, right?
Yes, and probably that is where the real heavy lifting comes at the end of the day. We've talked about how we each record our own sides on our Sony DSLR cameras in front of us, which all record to memory cards, and in this case it's an SD card actually. Now once the shows are done recording, you can pop out your memory card and copy your files to a shared folder. I connect mine with a cable, and it's actually pretty cool. I got one of those little USB hubs that has buttons on it, and I just push the button and that enables the USB mode, and it saves me having to constantly touch the camera, which means moving it, which means a whole reset thing, and then I can just copy my files over. It makes it a lot easier, and obviously by doing this it makes sure that everything's in the same place.
Exactly, and of course, depending on internet speeds and how big or long our recordings are, the transfers take, as much time as they might take, and that fun part really starts once all those files are in the same place, and that is what we call editing. So let me explain how this all works and how it all comes together. Now, just like cutting and pasting like you do in just a text document, it occurs very simple. You highlight a piece of audio or video, just like you would text in an email. You can then cut, paste, copy, or even delete that piece of audio or video, just like you would in text. Now, in the case of Double Tap TV, because I've got footage recorded in Montreal, Stephen has his footage recorded in Glasgow, and then we have a guest who is likely on Zoom or Riverside. We upload all that stuff to Dropbox, like Stephen said earlier, and when the files are all there in that one place, Jordan Steves, our magnificent editor, goes to work. Once all the files are there, he brings them into Adobe Premiere Pro. We lay them down on what's called a timeline. Now, the timeline is literally just a bunch of rows of video and audio stacked on top of each other. There's numbers at the top that represent the actual time. Audio is a little easier to edit than video because you're not worried about a picture on the screen. So if you have different rows of audio, for example, all you have to do is make sure that it all matches and makes sense. instead of all being on top of each other in some kind of jumble, so that when you listen back, you can't even hear or make out what's being said. You got to make sure that everything flows and nothing overlaps. Now, when it comes to video, it's a little bit more complicated because we're actually showing the picture on the screen. So when you want to show 3 people, we do what's called a 3-way split screen. We manipulate the 3 pieces of video that we have so they all look nice on the screen. Now, similar, when you want to do 2 people, that's called a 2-way split screen. And a single shot is when you only have 1 image on the screen at a time, which obviously makes it a lot easier. Not much manipulation there. Now, it can get more creative when it comes to, editing graphics and throwing little logos on the screen and stuff like that. But we're not going to get into too much detail there because we can go down a rabbit hole that we definitely want to save for another episode if you're interested.
Now, we do go through a process whereby the content is then reviewed and the show is screened by experts in integrated described video. And that's to make sure that the final product that you see on the screen is accessible for anyone who's watching. So if you have no vision, then you can understand everything and paint a mental picture that matches what's on screen. And if you can't hear, then the captions take care of that.
And Stephen, that's how we produce Double Tap TV and, of course, the Double Tap Daily podcast. I am absolutely zonked just thinking about that and having gone through it.
I'm more tired now than I am doing the show. It seems like a lot of work goes into this. I didn't know.
Yeah, well, it does go into it a little bit of work after we sit here and record these shows. But if you want to know more, do let us know. You know how to get in touch with us. We're going to put all that stuff up at the end of the show. So thank you, Damashe, for being the one who was the catalyst to getting this episode started. It was a question from our Ask Us Anything episode. We're happy to answer it. Hopefully we didn't geek out too much and get too complicated here. If you want us to go in more detail, maybe that's a web series for down the road.
Thanks for watching Double Tap. Send us your feedback to feedback@doubletaponair.com. Leave us a voicemail at 1-877-803-4567. Hosted by Marc in Montreal and Stephen Scott in Glasgow. Producer Marc. Editing and graphics Jordan Steves. Voiceover Anna Vicino. Social media Wendy Kaufman. Integrated Described Video Specialist M. Williams. Supervising Producer Michelle Dudas. Manager Programming AMI TV Lizanne Gagne. Director Content Development and Production Karen Nye. VP Content Development and Operations John Melville. President and CEO David Arrington. Copyright 2023 Accessible Media Inc.
An AMI original production.